Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our screening Taboo and Totem as part of the Tropicália and Beyond Dialogues in Brazilian Film History series. This is part of TATE Film's Counter History series, which is curated by Stefan Solomon. It's been a long time coming, this series, and a lot of work. So thank you so much to Stefan for all of the work. He's gone above and beyond for this one to not only curate the series, but liaise with all the artists, bring everyone here, and also help work with Maria Gibert to bring in all of the media, actually, including many film prints. So we're really pleased today to be screening Triste Trópico on 35mm film. And also this evening, actually we have 4 35mm film screening today. So we're really, really grateful. A lot of these are quite rare screenings. And yeah, thank you to Maria and Stefan for all of your work in ensuring that this could happen and that we could share it with you. I won't say too much because we've got 3 sessions today and we have 2 more intros, but I just wanted to say, because we have breaks between the screenings and while we're in the gallery today, it would be wonderful. There's a free display of Helio Odosica's Tropicália. It's on level 3 of the Blavatnik building in the performer and participant display. So we encourage you to go into the display. It's now open, that you can walk into the sand, into the penetrable structures. And that's something that it's had various iterations since it opened 1.5 years ago in this building, but we're really pleased with the way that it's now interactive once again. So venture there in between the films. And I will now turn it over to Stefan to introduce today's program.
Thank you, Carly, and welcome back again today. It's great to have all of you here. I'll also keep my introduction very brief because we have a lot of film to get through, and we're hopefully going to have a bit of a discussion afterwards as well, and with the director of our first film today, Pedro Neves Marques. Perhaps as opposed to the first 2 screenings in this series on Thursday and Friday nights, the dialogue between the 2 films may not be as apparent for a number of reasons, not least of all which is the fact that Arturo Omar's Triste Trópico from 1974 is a really singular film, perhaps in the history of Brazilian cinema, in the way that it emerges in 1974 as something distinct from the films of the Cinema Novo movement and even of Cinema Marginal as well, and the way that Arturo Omar considers his film to be a kind of anti-documentary. It has the semblance of a plot involving a character called Dr. Artur, who works and studies in Europe, befriends the surrealists, including Breton, and then makes his way back to Brazil, where he ingratiates himself into an indigenous tribe. But that plot is really not the focus of the film and is perhaps a bit of a red herring. It's far more notable for the way that Artur Omar, not Dr. Artur, brings in a lot of different materials into his film, and the way that he's interested in recasting and reinventing the grammar of film and the language of cinema and what he does. So there are connections certainly with in terms of a parody of anthropological discourse and a reframing of anthropology in Artur's work with the work of Pedro Neves Marques. Pedro was born in Lisbon and now lives and works in New York. He's a writer and a filmmaker, and I first encountered his work actually through his writing. He's published a couple of collections of short stories, O Processo de Integração, The Process of Integration from 2012, and this year, Morir na América, Dying in America. And he's also published a monumental volume, a compendium of works related to anthropology, to cannibalism, and to anthropophagy, this idea of cultural cannibalism that exists in Brazilian history, with archive books that was released in 2014, which includes works from the 16th century all the way up until today. And it's from reading that work that I was inspired in many ways to come to curate this series in the way that it's been curated. Pedro is also the co-founder of Inhabitants, an online space for exploratory documentary and video making. He's had a recent long exhibition of his work at the Barado Museum in Lisbon this year. And this film that we're going to see today, Semente, Exterminadora, is his first short fiction film that showed at Indie Lisboa and other festivals this year. And it's now the premiere of that work in the UK, but I'll let Pedro talk a little bit more about that. So welcome, Pedro.
Thanks, Stefan. I'll be very brief. I'd rather go straight to the films. I'll just say, so as Stefan said, this premiered this year. It's the first time I was really kind of investing in fiction more than in a film essay kind of format, to which, to me, Arthur Omar's film was always very inspirational. And about the film, I'll just say that maybe the landscape is as much a character as the protagonists, and it's very much rooted in the fact that today Brazil is actually one of the most contaminated countries in terms of chemicals from all different sorts of industries. And that is kind of the backbone behind the story. So it's very much rooted in a present moment, but as you'll see, it also very, very discreetly, I actually hope discreetly, it kind of projects into other possible futures or even kind of a different way of looking at the present in Brazil right now. And I guess in terms of contextualizing the film, I won't say much more. I don't want to ruin it. And then we have a brief chat at the end. So thanks so much for coming at this time of the day. Thanks.
Thank you for staying for that screening, and I apologize for the difficulties with the subtitles in some of those scenes. I can't stress the difficulty of obtaining a print like this and the rarity of seeing it. So I think we can perhaps overlook that small difficulty of dealing with the subtitles, and maybe Arturo Omar might say that that's not perhaps such a hurdle as it appears, that there's so much involved in that film that the story as communicated through the narration is only one element of it, so there's plenty more to obtain from it. But perhaps we can start by talking about Pedro's film. I'm conscious of time, so I might just ask you, Pedro, a couple of questions, and then perhaps there'll be questions from the audience about the film as well. So would you like to say a bit more about how you put the film together, especially the kinds of things it's responding to? So, I mean, especially in terms of questions to do with agriculture, with transgenic crops in Brazil today. I think that's one of the central elements of the film, but also to do with automation, to do with the idea of the android. And I mean, maybe you can talk about that a bit in relation to your previous work as well. But would you like to?
Well, those are a lot of questions
Yes.
in one. First, I wasn't, before I answer that, I wasn't thinking of making any declaration or statement, but I was just reading the news while the films were playing, and apparently the philosopher Judith Butler was just verbally and physically attacked at the airports in Congonhas in São Paulo after a week where Judith Butler was attacked in many ways in the streets, let's say, by protesters against a lecture she was giving in São Paulo. So I was really kind of mad while reading the news, especially to me, that's not the Brazil I love, and especially in terms of gender, for example, that adds a lot to teach other places as it has taught me. So it's really, like, to me, I was really angry at reading the news now, so I had to say something about the situation that just happened yesterday with Judith Butler, which is just one more case in what's happening in Brazil for the last year and a half.
Yeah.
So just throwing that out there. And now going to the film. It's a lot of questions. To me, I wanted to do, I think I'll just say that I wanted to do a science fiction film, which is something that's very dear to me in other films and other works that you know as well, previous to this one. But I wanted to do something which doesn't look like science fiction in any way, because the present is already so sci-fi in many circumstances, right? So you don't need to project yourself. That was, to me, one of the main ideas, and especially when we were in the final stages of the film, or of starting the film. The disaster in Mariana in Minas Gerais happened, where this kind of mineral dam broke. It's one of the biggest environmental disasters in the history of mankind, actually. And I had a different beginning for the film, and we changed it. So initially it would have been a sort of oil spill in one of these oil rigs on the shore of Rio, and then the disaster in Minas Gerais, which is in the interior, happened, and some of those sounds, the radio sounds that you hear, are all from those first days. So that was the kind of the background to the kind of environmental, in a way, approach the film has. So maybe that's an answer to start with. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, your work in general, and especially increasingly perhaps, has a mind towards ecological crisis, and especially relations between the human and non-human parts of this world. I'm interested in the way that relates to your writing about Tropicália, and writing about the legacy of tropicalism in Brazil and what that still might mean today with relation to those questions. Pedro's writing about Tropicália as a concept was very interesting to me, and the film that you made, Where to Sit at the Dinner Table, in response to questions of cultural cannibalism and anthropophagy, and how that is situated in the 60s, but also has perhaps some relevance to contemporary questions. But also with Arturo Mar's film, there's actually, I guess, a similar antipathy or resistance to tropicalism. So I wondered, I mean, even though the films are very different, and even though your approach is very different, if you wanted to say something about what you've written about Tropicália in relation to ecology now.
I think initially, for sure, I had an image of Tropicália and a critique of Tropicália that was informed by some of the writings that Sueli Rolnick was writing, and she was one that I found that criticized a lot of the tropicalists, let's say, how they complied to having become a sort of Brazilian commodity, in a way. And I agree with that in a way, in the sense that this is not a critique of the films or the movement itself back in the time, obviously, but it is perhaps a critique of its legacy. And oftentimes, or most of the times, I find that what an international art market in particular wants to see in Brazilian art and culture is a sort of tropical and tropicalist aesthetics, right? And so there's this both external gaze that just wants that, and there's a sort of compliance, a sort of voluntary compliance from, I would say, especially younger artists, right? So again, this is not critique of the kind of the fathers of Tropicália. And I say fathers because it's all men. So that's my approach. Of course, seeing these films now with the situation that's happening in Brazil, you can't deny how powerful they still are and how they speak in this film now. I mean, it's insane seeing this today, right?
Yeah, even though it's a really unique film in a lot of ways, but it's still I mean, yeah, and I don't know if it has connections or not with other films today, but Arturo Omar writes in an interview that's included in the catalogue for this series of how in his work he resisted the kind of approaches of cinema novo directors and cinema marginal directors on the other hand. So saying that cinema novo directors were too traditional, but cinema marginal was too reactionary. So he's striking a kind of balance in between those two. And I wonder if, I mean, the kind of thing that he's doing here in what we might call now a mockumentary style was at that time in Brazil much more radical than we might think. You know, it's far less common and far more unique. So perhaps in that way, it still seems very radical, of course.
I think so. Because I just, perhaps to add, I think a lot of people, especially outside of Brazil, look at this body of work and they want this kind of idea that Brazilians also have often about like this kind of melting pot, right? And I'm much more interested in the opacities and the incapacities between difference. So I distrust a lot of that image. And so my critique also runs through that kind of not believing in that kind of idea of the melting pot that works out. I don't think it works out often.
Yeah.
So that's my position. So
sure. And in Omar's film, we have all of these. Yeah. It's very citational. We have all of these different materials, but there's sometimes no connection between them. It doesn't integrate completely, and that's kind of his.
But it has this kind of like mix between desire and opacity, right? So there's this kind of obvious fascination with all of these things, but then kind of this abrupt jump cuts and all of this kind of in the formal sense, which really kind of play out, I think, this tension.
Sure.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can. Yes, a question for.
Yes. I saw.
It's not
Turn it off.
working.
Eu vi, vou falar em português que é mais fácil. Eu vi este filme do Arturo Omar no Brasil, na primeira exibição que aconteceu lá, na Casa do Estudante do Brasil. Poucos dias depois, a Casa do Estudante foi incendiada, começando o período mais difícil da ditadura no Brasil. Eu quero dizer que essa mostra está mexendo demais comigo. Eu vim para cá, estou vendo o filme, eu tirei até os sapatos, porque ontem o filme do Bandido dizia só vai sobreviver quem não tiver sapato. Então, já vi o filme hoje sem sapato. E também, ontem, à noite, eu tive um pesadelo, dormindo numa cama imensa lá do Hotel Ibis. Eu tive um pesadelo, coisa que eu não tenho raramente. Um pesadelo como se tivesse alguém dentro do quarto. Eu pensei que era o bandido da luz vermelha que estava lá tentando me matar. Mas o que eu quero dizer é o seguinte, esse filme mexeu muito comigo, porque eu fiquei perguntando como é que pode um povo ficar dançando, sambando, brincando daquela maneira como é mostrado aqui em outros filmes, dentro de uma situação tão dramática que a gente vive há muitos anos lá no Brasil. E também porque eu fiz um curso de cinema com o Arturo Omar, com o Iso, que fez a fotografia, e com o Ricardo Miranda, que fez a montagem desse filme. E nós éramos uns jovens tão alegres, tão felizes, e não medíamos consequências para fazer os filmes que queríamos. Fazer um filme dessa maneira, naquela época, era uma extravagância inacreditável. Então, não vou tomar mais muito tempo, porque sabe o seguinte, essa lembrança de ter feito esse trabalho junto com o Arturo Omar, teve um detalhe muito interessante. Eu fiz o curso com o José Carlos Avelar, um grande crítico que faleceu há pouco tempo, e o Ronald Monteiro, na Cinemateca do Museu de Arte Moderna. Lá haviam duas moviolas, uma Steinbeck e uma Prévost. e nós ficávamos disputando a moviola para saber quem é que ia trabalhar naquela noite. E uma bela noite estava lá o Ricardo Miranda e o Omar fazendo montagem desse filme, e era meu horário. Eu falei, mas é o meu horário, eu preciso trabalhar também. Aí tinha uma outra moviola fechada, e eles falaram, não, tu vai trabalhar na outra, mas não tem ninguém para abrir a outra. Aí fizemos uma mágica, conseguimos, trabalhei na outra, só para... Depois eu conto com mais detalhes como é que foi. Mas eu só queria deixar marcada essa força desse filme naquela época e a consequência do incêndio logo depois na casa do estudante. Desculpa a interferência, mas eu não podia deixar de marcar essa... Fala.
Obrigado.
Should I try and
Sim.
just very quickly summarize, because it's impossible to summarize. Just to say, we're going to see your film on Sunday. I've never seen it, so I'm really anxious to see it. But just saying, like, I don't know what you were saying about how is it possible to see all of these people dancing in this film in the situation of Brazil, in the history of Brazil, and correct me if I'm translating things wrong. And also stories about the first time you saw this film, which was, again, the House of Students in Rio? Yes. In Rio, which was afterwards burned down by a group. After, yeah. Quem incendiou a casa depois?
Foram os militares.
Na altura, exato.
No começo da ditadura.
It was at the beginning of the dictatorship, so the military burned down the House of Students after the screening of this film. And also, there were very little means to produce and film this kind of films at the time, obviously. There were only 2 moviolas at the Museum of Modern Art in São Paulo. And Ricardo Miranda, the editor, was at the same time editing. Who was the film? De quem era o filme?
Eu estava fazendo meu filme.
Exato.
Neblina, primeiro filme
Pronto.
que eu estava fazendo, e eles estavam fazendo isso.
Exato. There were only 2 moviolas, and so they will have to kind of take turns and to fight for the only 2 moviolas to edit the films at the museum. This was a very quick transition, I guess.
Perhaps time for one last question. Bob, would you like?
To follow up on Pedro's critique of tropicalismo, I think part of the problem is that the idea of anthropophagy is easily co-optable. You know, Roberto Schwartz said that there's also cannibalization from above, right? It's not always from below. So that trope became a synonym for kind of intertextuality, remix, et cetera. But there's another aspect of anthropophagy, which is, to my mind, more radical, which is the idea of the Carib Revolution, which was superior to the French Revolution in its pour droit de l'homme. And the idea there, you get ecology, you get communalism, you get the commons. And to me, that's actually more radical, to respect for indigenous culture. And in Triste, Trópico, it's so indigenous. So part of the reason there are no subtitles is you're hearing all these indigenous languages. Remember, he says there are, 150, 200 languages which are indigenous. So you're hearing, I was amazed at how much language. You know, you hear Arabic, you hear Hebrew, you hear Greek, and lots of indigenous languages and lots of patois languages, right? So, you know, I saw this film one time around the time it was made, and I was just blown away by it this time because you learn in these years how rich that film is.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Did you want to?
I'd just say I agree fully with what you're saying. I have a very also strong critique of anthropophagia, and that's published.
Yeah.
I wrote and I've published on this for sure, in the sense that I agree with you. There's much more there to unpack in terms of the commons or ecology or anthropology than actually a sort of cultural studies kind of approach. And I think you even, what I find more surprising is that you find a lot of those messages, let's say, even in the early writings of the modernists in the 20s. You have, if you go beyond the manifesto, or even in the manifesto, into other like less known and most of them not translated work, and I've been involved in translating part of this, you really find sentences and ideas that are really ahead of its time in terms of thinking about the relation between the body and the environment, for example, a really deep kind of sense of ecology, if you want to call it that. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I think it's a work to be made. I'm not sure it's being made in Brazil. I'm not sure if it's necessary. I don't know if we need to cling to it anymore as well. So sometimes I wonder if it's like a concept that was very important, but what do we do with it? But if it's not in that way that you're saying, I don't think it's useful.
Okay, well, perhaps we'll leave it there. I'm just aware that we're due to be back here in a matter of half an hour.
35 minutes, we're back.
Yes, so we'll be back here with a series of found footage films, and we'll be talking with Carlos Adriano, one of the filmmakers. But please join me in thanking Pedro Neves Marques.